Hello everyone. So even though it's still January, I feel like time is flying and we're getting closer and closer to when we will want to be starting our warm season flowers. So what I'm going to cover in today's video are my top 5 cut flowers for small gardens. So over the last 5 years of gardening exclusively in containers on my rooftop deck, I've found which flowers I really like the best for cutting and making bouquets. Now, if you're not familiar with the term cut flower or cut and come again flowers, these are basically the flowers that you can harvest throughout the season and the plants will still continue to produce more flowers. In fact, it's probably preferable that you harvest as much as you can, because if you leave flowers on the plant that go to seed, that's going to tell the plant to start producing seeds and not producing as many flowers. And it just looks nicer if you continue to harvest the flowers before they start to fade. Now, if you garden in a small space, you really have to maximize the productivity of the space that you have available. And that's why I found over the last few years which flowers tend to work best in my small space where I could still harvest a lot of flowers, even if I only have 1 or 2 plants of a specific variety. So I'm gonna go over my top 5. This is in no way comprehensive because there are so many cut flowers that I have yet to try in my garden. But again, because of limited space, I tend to stick to what's tried and true and then add in a new plant or 2 every season and then see how I like it going forward. But these are my top 5 best cut flowers for small gardens. Now I have ordered these, not, most to least favorite, but like my number 1 on this list would be my number 1 recommendation to somebody who is just starting out and looking for some sort of productive flower for their garden. And my number 1 is zinnias. And I will put in here either photos or videos of how the zinnias have done in my garden in the last few years, but these are by far my must-haves in the garden. I love how productive they are. They're also one of the first that start to bloom in my garden. I would say I get flowers on these probably starting to form in about mid-June, and then I'm harvesting early July, whereas some of the other flowers on this list take a little bit longer. Now, I start my zinnias inside from seed about 6 weeks before last frost, and then I transplant them outside. But what I love, other than the productivity, is the variety of zinnias that are available. I would say everyone probably loves the Queenie Lime series. I also love the giant Benary zinnias. The taller zinnias will give you more options as far as longer stems and bigger flower heads. Some of the smaller zinnias, will have shorter stems and cute little flowers. So there's a wide variety that you can choose from. I don't know if I'll ever even get to be able to grow all of the varieties of zinnias that are out there, but I will list down below some of my favorites that I have grown so far. I also have a reel, and I'm hoping I can insert it here because it really shows how productive these flowers are. Basically, I cut off all the zinnia flowers and harvested them all on one day in my garden, in my center raised bed. And then I took video every day to show you how quickly they grow back. And within a week, basically my entire bed is filled with flowers. Now, I love not only making bouquets for myself, but also giving away bouquets to friends and strangers. So the more productive a plant can be, the better it'll be for my intended use. The only issues I've really come across with my zinnias is powdery mildew. I'm gonna try to be more on top of it this year, but I did learn that I used to think it was water on the leaves that cause powdery mildew. It's actually when there's just humidity surrounding the leaves, and water on the leaves can actually prevent powdery mildew. So I'm going to try to stay up on that a little bit better this year, but definitely give your plants airflow so that it helps to decrease the likelihood that they're going to get powdery mildew. But other than that, I really don't have many issues growing zinnias. They're super easy, they're really beautiful, and they're incredibly productive flowers. My number 2 is probably my favorite flower just looking at the flower, and that's dahlias. Now, the reason they're not my number 1 is I feel like they're just not quite as productive as zinnias, and I did have an off year with them last year. I feel like most people did, where they didn't start to bloom until way later in the season, despite starting them around the same time that I do every year. So because I've had that issue and I've really never had any issues with my zinnias doing the same thing, that's why zinnias got the number 1 spot. But oh my goodness, dahlia flowers are beautiful. Anytime I make a bouquet, that's the flower that stands out to people in it, and they always ask about it and they love it. Now, I grow my dahlias in grow bags because I have had issues with tuber rot in the past. So for me, that's the best way to grow them. I personally also love the dinner plate dahlias. These are the giant dahlias that can get up to like 5 feet tall. The flowers can be the size of my head. Now, however, in a small space, that means it does take up more room. And it can be a bit more difficult when you're making bouquets to try to fit in the giant flowers with the rest of it when the other flowers are a little bit smaller. So you might also want to look into decorative dahlias. I have grown a few decorative dahlias in my raised beds as well. They're just as productive, they're just smaller plants, so you can also fit more into a smaller area. So definitely check out those two options, whether you're going with a dinner plate or a decorative dahlia. But oh my goodness, these are also so incredibly productive. When we were in France for 10 days, I came back to a dahlia plant filled with flowers. Now, usually, again, I'm harvesting throughout the season, so I don't let the plant get completely full, but it was stunning. And I really hope that I have a photo that I can insert here to show you just how many flowers one single plant produced. So if you want a beautiful flower on a plant that is productive, that again, I had one issue last year, but I've been growing them every other year before that, and they did just fine. But these are definitely my favorite flower itself to include in bouquets, and it's definitely the standout anytime I've ever given someone a dahlia. My next favorite cut flower is one that I'm obsessed with, and that is Gumina. I have grown it every single year in the exact same raised bed. I have even more varieties that I'm going to plant this year, and I'm so excited. I love them because they look like they come from a Dr. Seuss book. They don't look like flowers that you expect to see. They're the one that is probably the least recognized by people. When I give them a bouquet, they always ask, what is this flower? And I love them so much. I also love them to dry, if that's something that you were looking for. So these are definitely incredibly productive throughout the season. The more I find that I harvest, the bushier the plants will get. They do start blooming a little bit later compared to how zinnias do and dahlias typically do, last year being the only exception. But I start these inside about 8 weeks before last frost. I actually think this year I'm going to try 10 weeks before last frost, because even when I do 8 weeks, they're still relatively small once I get them outside. And then I would say I get flowers on these maybe mid to late July, and then they last throughout the end of the season. And I also know some people that leave their Gumina in their containers to add winter interest, and they said it holds the color really well. So these really hold their shape and their form. Because of that, they also last really long in bouquets. So I absolutely love Gumina. If you've never tried growing Gumina before, at least try it once. I would say in terms of any issues with pests or fungal disease, really nothing. They are very, very easy for me to grow. Again, they just bloom slightly later than the other flowers I've talked about so far, but very, very low maintenance from my experience. So if you haven't grown Gumina before, definitely try it. Just 1 or 2 plants produce so many flowers, and you will have something that's really adorable growing in your garden. Next on my list are China Asters. And I'd grown them in the past, but last year was the first year where I picked out specific varieties that looked beautiful, not just blends of China Aster seeds, and when I gave them adequate amount of space in the garden. But I was surprised by how early these bloomed. I usually expect China Asters not to bloom until like late July, but I had flowers forming early July. I was harvesting in the middle of that month. So it was really great. They last incredibly long throughout the season, so you can still harvest them in the fall. But I absolutely loved these flowers. There's a lot of different shapes and forms to these that are really unique from anything else that I've seen. Also some really beautiful colors. I will obviously show you the ones I grew here, and I'll link them down below, and also the new ones that I'm gonna try this year. But I was just really impressed. The stems were really long and beautiful, maybe about, I'd say like 12 inches long. The more you harvest, the more they produced. And I only had maybe 4 plants for each of the varieties, and I got so many flowers from each of them. So I highly, highly recommend China Asters. Like I said, I'll link my favorites down below, but whether you want something that's like more tight and structured or something that's a bit more wild and fluffy, there are options for both of those. In terms of pest issues, I did have a little bit of powdery mildew, but not as bad as the zinnias. I think the zinnias actually spread the powdery mildew to the China Asters, and I think I had scale on them, and that was it, but not a huge issue in terms of pests, and I didn't have to do a lot of maintenance for them in the garden. I absolutely loved them. And then my last one is one that I think I kind of ignored for the first few years and then really fell in love the last couple years, and that's Echinacea. I think because I associate it so much with like an end of season flower that you kind of just leave in your garden, I never really included it in bouquets. And then I started to, and again, the more you cut, the more it will produce. But even if you want to leave them to go to seed, you can then harvest the seed heads. Like the seed heads themselves are really beautiful for like more late fall, winter bouquets. So not only can you choose like the beauty of the flower, but you can also harvest it for the beauty of the seed head. And I feel like Echinacea is one where there are more new varieties being introduced that are really beautiful. Now, I do love the standard, very open Echinacea. But then there's also what are called like the double scoop Echinacea that have like a little fluffy center. So I feel like the flowers, there's just more varieties kind of being introduced. But these flowers are absolutely stunning. They're coming in more colors, some that are so bright and so vibrant. So these have now become one of my favorite cut flowers, where in the past I feel like I kind of ignored them or just thought, they were those perennials that I see everywhere because they're native to this area. But I've really, really fallen in love with them so much in the last few years. These also, I find, last really well in vases. So I would say of the 5 flowers that I've mentioned so far, Dahlias are typically the first ones that kind of start to turn in the vase. So I'll just remove them then from the bouquet. Gumina, I would say, definitely lasts the longest. Again, because it already kind of dries in the form that it is fresh on the plant. It doesn't really look that different. So you could even let all the water evaporate and the Gumina would probably still look the same. So if vase life is something that you're thinking of, do keep that in mind. But I absolutely love these 5 flowers that I've recommended. I know some that I need to try include stock. So I don't know if I got seeds for that or if I need to get some, because I really want to try growing some stock. But if there's any other cut flowers that you highly recommend that you love, let me know down below. And like I said, I will link down the varieties that I'm growing that I really love the most of the ones that I've mentioned, because if you are looking to pick some up, I would order your seeds now so that you have them in time to start in that like 6 to 8 window before the last frost date, because it's coming faster than we think it'll get here. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.